Good morning. Today's date is March the 2nd, year 2012. This is a meeting of the Arizona Board of Executive Clemency. We're at the Arizona State Prison Complex Iman Reining Unit, and we are here today to hear the request for executive clemency on behalf of Mr. Robert Towery, DLC number 51550. There are two things that we'll be considering today, and they would be, number one, Mr. Towery's request for a commutation of his sentence, after which we will then take a vote on whether or not a reprieve of Mr. Towery's scheduled execution should be recommended to the governor. And the time now is 8:45, and we will begin. And sir, you are Mr. Towery, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. And is that your correct DOC number?
Yes, sir.
51550. Thank you. Okay, you can be seated here, and we will turn now to Mr. Bates. Mr. Bates, will you be, or?
Ms. Day will.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Belcher and members of the board.
Good morning.
My name is Therese Day. I represent Mr. Robert Towery, who is here this morning to request that the board hear his plea for commutation. We do not have a request for reprieve today.
Okay. Thank you.
With me are Dale Bache, Kelly Schneider, and Natasha Merle, who also represent Mr. Towery and who will also be presenting portions of this hearing today. I would first like to thank the board for coming to the prison today to allow Mr. Towery to be present. And I would also like to thank the warden, Deputy Warden Barrios, and all of the prison staff for their efforts in making this hearing happen this morning. As a preliminary matter, we would like to ask the board to respond to our letter of February 17th, in which we requested that Mr. Towery be allowed to sit with his attorneys at counsel table rather than to make his plea for commutation from a cage.
Okay.
And Mr. Belcher, if you wouldn't mind responding to that at this time.
All right. Thank you. No, I would not mind at all. Once in receipt of your letter, being that the Department of Corrections obviously allows us to have clemency hearings at the state prison, the logistical setup of these hearings is totally 100% within the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections. I did take the liberty to forward your letter, and I also had received a letter from, I can't think of her name, Mr. Mormon's attorney.
Okay.
Basically, somewhat identical request that they be allowed to sit at the attorney table. I submitted those to the Department of Corrections, and those requests were denied by the Department of Corrections, and that's the status.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Belcher.
Thank you.
And also, we appreciate the consideration of both you and the DOC. However, we still would like to note that we believe that at this type of proceeding, our client should be able to sit with us at counsel table, and we hope that the DOC would take that into consideration for the future.
Okay, thank you.
We have presented our application to the board, in which we have listed several reasons why we believe it would be appropriate and just to commute the sentence of Mr. Towery to life without the possibility of parole. Mr. Towery's family is here today to offer support to him in this request. We know the board has received our application and has reviewed it. Our presentation today will focus on the following issues. We will first provide a brief explanation of Robert's family history and background, and will explain to the board what Robert's state of mind was at the time of the crime, which was due in significant part to his severe addiction to methamphetamine. You will then hear from Mr. Towery himself, who wants to apologize to the family of Mark Jones for taking Mr. Jones's life and for the pain that it has caused Mr. Jones's family. He will admit his guilt to the family of Mr. Jones today, and he will do his best to explain why this horrible crime ever occurred. We will explain through the testimony of Dr. Pablo Stewart why Robert's background, in combination with his extreme addiction to methamphetamine, led to the tragic death of Mr. Jones. We will briefly discuss Robin's prison record and why his good behavior in custody is a strong indication that he does not pose a risk of violence in the future should this board decide to commute his sentence to life without the possibility of parole. We will briefly describe how the legal system failed Robert, because at the time that he was sentenced, the law in Arizona did not allow his sentencing judge to consider his evidence of childhood abuse, and how you, the board, may consider this today in deciding whether his sentence should be commuted to life without the possibility of parole. Finally, we will explain why Robert's death sentence is disproportionate given the nature and circumstances of this crime and the fact that his co-defendant, who was a major participant in the crime, received a sentence of 10 years in prison rather than death and is a free man today.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk to the board a bit this morning about Robert's childhood. I'm going to leave it to Dr. Pablo Stewart, who will be speaking to the board in a few minutes or shortly, to explain the impact of Robert's childhood filled with abuse and addiction on the man he was and the person he is today. For my part, I would just like to give the board some context to help understand Robert's life. Robert's home life wasn't...
This your name and...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Kelly Schneider. I'm with the Federal Public Defender. I'm one of Mr.
Thank you.
Towery's lawyers. I apologize.
You might have said that, and I might have missed it, but...
No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Robert's home life wasn't something that most of us have experienced or could imagine. It wasn't filled with love and affection, the things that we know build a happy and healthy child. Robert's world, from the time he was a very small child, was filled with violence and abuse. Robert's mother mentally tormented him from the time he was a child until he was a grown man. Robert's mother would say things like, "You'll never amount to anything. You're worthless. I hate you. You should have died as a child." And she would say those things to him on a near daily basis. Robert's mother beat him mercilessly and punished him in horrifying ways. She hit him with whatever was handy, belts, coat hangers, with little rhyme or reason. Robert's about 6 years old in this photograph. This is the year that Robert almost lost his leg to his mother's discipline. He'd been playing with his sisters in a wagon and had fallen. He hurt his knee, limped throughout the day, and it got progressively worse. His mother thought he was faking the injury and punished him. She punished him by having him kneel in a box of raw rice on that bad knee while the family had dinner, ate ice cream, watched television. It was hours. By morning, his leg had swelled to 3 times its normal size. He wound up in the hospital and nearly lost his leg. 6 years old is the same year that Robert was anally and orally raped by a neighbor boy. He would lure Robert into the family's bomb shelter where all the children wanted to play. He would tell Robert that the door was magical and he would have to perform a sex act to get out of the room. I asked Robert if he'd ever told anybody about this abuse, and he told me not until his 20s. I asked him why he hadn't told his mom, and Robert said he was sure he would have gotten in trouble. He reminded me that she used to beat him when he had to go to the hospital to get stitches, that when he was shot by a stray bullet in the alley behind the family's home as a child, he was punished for that. He was sure that if he told, he would have gotten in trouble. It was also at this age 6 when Robert started to drink alcohol. He would bartend at his family's weekly poker games, dropping off drinks to the adults and picking them up when they were through. He would finish whatever was left in the family's kitchen. Robert's about 8 years old in this picture. This is around the time that Robert's mother bound and gagged him and stuck him in the floorboard of the family's car. They were on their way home from a family trip, and Robert was simply being too loud. His sisters watched, too terrified to help him, as he cried himself to sleep. Robert's 12 in this picture. He was still wetting the bed at the time, and that should be a significant trigger to this board, because most children stop wetting the bed around age 5. But children who are sexually and physically abused often demonstrate this regressive behavior. Rather than helping Robert with this problem, his mother would humiliate him. She screamed bedwetter at him in front of his friends and his family. She also hung his stained sheets over the bushes in the family's front yard so that when he came home from school with his friends, he would have to pass them, utterly humiliated. 12 was around the year that Robert's parents divorced, and his dad left his life. Abandonment became a central theme for Robert as his sisters left in the short years after that. 12 was the year that Robert found out that the man he'd always known as Dad wasn't his father. Instead, the man he'd grown up knowing as Uncle Chuck was his biological father, and his mother banished Mr. Towery from his life. 12 was the year that Robert started to smoke marijuana, to feel normal, to feel something. And it was around this same time, 12 or 13, that Robert's mom expected him to start helping to support the family. But how could a child get cash to help support a family? How was a 12-year-old going to come up with $400? Getting money to help support his mother and his drug habit led to a lifetime plagued with theft. By 15, Robert's mother had thrown him out of the home. He was costing her too much money. He was using too much electricity, eating too much food. Robert would sneak into the home in the mornings to take a shower, change his clothes for school. He found a note one morning telling him not to return, but he came back the next day, and his mother had him arrested. That was the very first time Robert spent a day in a juvenile detention center for a crime, when his mother had him arrested for coming home to change clothes for school. By the time Robert was 17, he was an addict. He'd used virtually every drug you could think of: amphetamines, barbiturates, marijuana, angel dust, coke, LSD, methamphetamine. He'd overdosed once. It's at this point that he was placed in the drug treatment unit of a juvenile detention facility. It's significant that Robert became an addict as a child before he could consider the costs and risks of his drug use. The early age at which Robert began using drugs significantly increased the likelihood that he would be an addict as an adult. Robert was already addicted to the drugs as a child before he could fully understand what he was doing and the impact of the choices he was making. But I think it's while Robert's in this drug unit that we all catch a glimpse of who Robert could have been. He got his GED. He encouraged other students and helped with their academic efforts. He was a leader in 2 substance abuse programs. He was a responsible role model, according to the staff. He helped write the unit's newsletter. And the staff said that his repeated efforts on behalf of himself and others indicated much personal growth. Away from the drugs and away from his mother, Robert flourished. But when his time was served, he had nowhere else to go but back to his mother, back to the abuse, back to the pain, and ultimately back to the drugs. By the time of Mr. Jones's death, Robert's drug habit had increased to between 3.5 and 7 grams of methamphetamine a day.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm going to now talk a little bit about Robert's state of mind at the time of the crime. At the time that Robert killed Mr. Jones, he was severely addicted to methamphetamine and was using this drug in combination with other illegal drugs. People who knew Robert at the time told police investigating the crime that he would often stay up for days on meth. He also shared this fact with Dr. Jack Potts in a pre-screening evaluation early on in his case. At his trial, Dr. Bayless offered testimony about Robert's drug addiction and his state of mind at the time of the crime. Dr. Bayless is a forensic psychologist who is experienced in working with addicts and substance abuse treatment. In meeting with Robert, one of the things that struck Dr. Bayless most was the fact that in his many years of working with addicts, he was surprised that Robert was still alive, given the amount of methamphetamine that he was doing. He stated, "I've had a lot of experience in working with substance abuse and substance treatment. And I have to say that Mr. Towery is one of the lucky young men because he's not dead. He was using so much drugs that it is incredible. His drug of choice was methamphetamine, and he was using it intravenously." Dr. Bayless testified that the amount of meth that Robert said he was using was corroborated by his girlfriend who lived with him at the time. He used anywhere between 3.5 grams to 7 grams of meth a day. Dr. Bayless said, "That is an extreme amount of methamphetamine to inject into your system. Anyone without a significant drug habit, that would probably kill them." Dr. Bayless also noted he was using cocaine and marijuana and sometimes mixing meth with cocaine together. He also used heroin, magic mushrooms, peyote, and LSD. Dr. Bayless continued, Mr. Towery's addiction was so severe that he would take bladder acid and dilute it in water, draw it into a syringe, and inject it. Mainlining LSD is pretty incredible. Dr. Bayless explained what the effects on someone taking this level of drug and combination of drugs has. A person doing these kinds of drugs is self-destructive, and their judgment is markedly impaired. You become paranoid, delusional, you become violent, unpredictable, angry, hypersensitive, hyper-irritated. You will often perceive threat where such does not exist and become very bizarre. Dr. Bayless also testified about the addictive nature of meth and how it causes physical addiction, which means that the person's body becomes adjusted to this abnormal state and cannot function if that level of drug is not maintained. He explained, methamphetamine stimulates the pleasure center of the brain, and a person will almost use this to the exclusion of everything else. They will often go without eating, sleeping, and have one obsession in mind, and that is to utilize that particular drug. Dr. Bayless noted that this man is significantly addicted. There were periods of time when Mr. Towery would go 2 weeks without sleep, utilizing the drug, causing irritability, bouts of paranoia, and suspicion. Dr. Bayless also noted that this had a significant impact on Robert's state of mind at the time of the crime and his inability to exercise any reasonable judgment. He had impaired judgment and did things that simply were irrational and certainly drug-induced. There is no question that this level of methamphetamine caused Robert to become paranoid. Paranoia is a delusional disorder which causes you to think that everyone is out to get you or do something to you, to hurt you, to destroy you, to plot against you. Dr. Bayless also explained how damaged Robert's thinking was at the time of the crime. At the time in which this crime happened, the level of drugs which Mr. Towery was using would have significantly impaired his ability to do anything. I think that his ability to differentiate, to make rational judgment, to consider consequences was markedly impaired, as well as his ability to create a logical process of looking at what he was doing. When you take this level of methamphetamine, it just alters your personality totally. Dr. Bayless concluded by stating that at the time of the crime, Robert's ability to reason and exhibit judgment was severely impaired. He stated, understanding the nature and quality of his actions and right and wrongfulness was markedly impaired.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dale Bache. I'd like to introduce the board to Robert Towery. He would now like to address the board.
Thank you. Mr. Towery, go ahead.
Good morning. I would like to thank the board for this opportunity and for consideration of my case. First and foremost, I'd like to apologize to Mark's family. I have the deepest regrets for what I did. And I'm truly sorry for their loss, for what I did to them. I truly wish with my heart that I had not taken Mark's life. And it's a terrible thing that I did, and it should never have happened. He didn't deserve it, and nor did his family deserve what I did to them. I can only pray that they will find peace and that someday they'll be able to forgive me. I would like to apologize to my family for being such a train wreck for so many years. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. You can remain seated if you wish to, Mr. Towery. You don't have to stand. We respect.
I'm sorry that my actions of 20 years ago is bringing back all the pain of our past. Thank you for always standing by me and for going through this with me. I have spent the last 20 years trying to, thinking about what I did and what I was doing with my life. Things that they don't make any sense to me today. I can't make sense of it. I cannot for the life of me understand it, and it was just one terrible mistake after another. It ended in taking Mark's life. And I wish I could change it. I can't take it back. All I can do is try to ensure that others don't make the same mistakes that I made.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Towery, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Under what circumstances did you know Mr. Jones?
I met Mr. Jones through one of the young men that used to hang around my house. Would help around the shop and stuff. I was told it was his grandfather.
You were told that Mr. Jones was his grandfather?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then what else did you find out about Mr. Jones at that point?
Well, at that point, when I met him, he ended up actually being a client of my shop. He helped me with the contracts for my shop.
What was your shop and business at that time?
I owned a mobile auto mechanic service.
Mobile auto mechanic? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then you obviously, because he assisted you, then you began to know more about him. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how long after you met Mr. Jones did the suggestion, ideal, come up in your mind to rob him?
I'm not sure on timelines. I have a hard time remembering spatial timelines, but I'd say about a year.
Okay. And was it that you realized that he was in possession of some type of property or something that might be of value?
At the time that when Randy and I decided to rob Mark Jones, it was a choice that we made because I knew he had money in that house. It was a very nice house, and he had money at hand, and I was told he had a safe there.
Okay. And when the initial plan came, did you plan to take his life?
No, I think that decision was made in an instant, in that all I saw was a threat. I didn't want to be caught. I wanted to get the money and get out of town. And that's why I took his life.
Robert,
Yes, sir.
Did you understand the question? I think the question was, when you planned the robbery, did you plan to kill?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bates. In other words, when the plan was hatched to, okay, we're going to rob him, was taking his life part of that plan?
I think it was a possibility. I think it was considered.
Was it talked about between you and your co-defendant? The
Yes.
fact that
Yes, it was.
you might need to take his life in that process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And your co-defendant was aware of that as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mrs. Wilkins?
Well, maybe I should let him proceed before I ask
Okay.
the question. He may not answer.
Okay, thank you. Continue on, sir.
If this board grants my request for clemency, giving me a sentence of life without parole, I will do my best to pay for what I've done by continuing to speak about others, or to others, about the dangerous and the life-destroying aspects of drugs I will continue to be the best role model that I can be for my nephew, my kids, my nieces. Which brings me to my nephews and my nieces and my kids. And I'm sorry I wasn't a better man, a better uncle, a better father. I hope you will always remember what I've tried to teach you. Know that I'm very proud of you and that I love you so much. Again, thank you for this opportunity and for considering my case.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Wilkins.
Mr. Chairman, I have the letter that Mr. Towery read.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And Mr. Towery, you have admitted, Mr. Belcher, that you and Mr. Parker had discussed the possibility of murdering Mr. Jones, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were you going to do that? What options did you discuss then?
We didn't discuss any options. I mean, we both carried guns. We had ample means, it was not discussed. Just the possibility.
But there was only one gun brought to the murder, is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Or to the house?
No, ma'am. I had my gun and Randy had his. And then he ended up with my gun also.
And it was on him in the house,
Yes, ma'am.
as well as your gun?
Yes, ma'am.
And you had them loaded?
Yes, ma'am.
And as you failed in your attempt to be able to inject Mr. Jones with a battery acid or whatever substance that you had him convinced would put him to sleep, and you then used the ties around his neck, is there a reason you didn't take out the gun and shoot him?
The gun would...
obviously he suffered.
I didn't want to use the gun. A .357 is very loud. I didn't want to draw attention to the house. I didn't want to... I just didn't think that would have been the thing to do at the time.
And what type of gun did Mr. Barker have? Could you not have used his gun?
He had a 9mm, I believe it was 9mm or 38, I'm not positive. I believe it was a 9mm though. And it would have been basically as loud.
And truly, what was the purpose of the syringe all along when you took it?
I have no idea about the syringe. I don't remember using a syringe. I don't remember having the syringe. It's not the kind of syringe that I had, but I take responsibility for what happened to Mark. What Randy did, what I did, that's on me because I could have stopped it.
And then to pursue your relationship with Mr. Jones a bit further, he certainly befriended you and helped you.
Absolutely.
Was any of it through monetary means?
Yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, he had lent me money before. He had, like I said, he helped me with my business, and I worked on his cars and was paid for it. He gave me generous tips. He was actually quite nice to me.
And obviously must have thought a lot about you. It was at, what, about 6:30 at night when you approached his house?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock at night, I'm sorry. And he let you in, and obviously he did feel that you were a friend and somebody you could trust,
Yes, ma'am.
and had no problem with letting you into his home on that day.
Yes, ma'am.
And how much money did he loan you over a period of time?
I think there was 2 occasions, I would say, between the two, about $1,500.
And you did repay it?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
And then may I ask, were you using drugs at the level of 3.5 to 7 grams a day during the time you were operating the business, and that he knew you in that year, and I'm assuming this is about 1 year prior to the time of the murder, that he befriended you and you became friends with him and he helped you? Were you using meth at that rate for that entire year?
No, ma'am. it spiraled downward very quickly. I was using it when I first met him and stuff like that, but it wasn't at that level, no.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other? Mrs. Kirschbaum.
Sir,
Yes, ma'am.
prior to this offense, you had just previously committed another offense?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me about that.
It was a spur of the... I can't even explain how stupid it was, because my girlfriend and I pulled into the bar, and she went in and used the restroom. And when she came out, I said, it looks really like there's nobody here. And she said, there's only like 4 people in there. And inexplicably, I went and robbed them. I don't even have an idea of why. I just did.
Did that not jolt you or wake you up when that happened with what you did, because you got caught, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So what was transpiring in your mind after just having committed that offense? The fact that you could have almost killed someone doing that.
I can't even explain my state of mind. It doesn't make any sense to me now, in looking back on it, because I did things that made no sense. Everything around me was a threat. Everything was I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain the state of mind. It's something that you just do. You don't think. You don't consider. You just react.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. DeSoto.
Yes,
Yeah, I
sir.
have a few questions, Mr. Towery. You were in prison here in Arizona from what, 84 to 90 originally?
89, yes, sir.
And then you were paroled, and then you were revoked.
Yes, sir.
And what did you do to lead to that revocation?
I was revoked when my parole officer showed up at my house and he found a shotgun at the house. So I was revoked for that.
For prohibited possessor kind of thing?
Yes, sir.
Were you using when you were in, where were you in, Hyman? Tucson?
No, sir. I was in Perryville.
Perryville?
I didn't use drugs very much in prison at all, and really, the only thing I would smoke pot every once in a while. But I never had a dirty UA. I stayed away from everything else. I actually spent most of my time on the weight pile and working.
So then you go back in for possessing a shotgun.
Yes, sir.
Were you committing any other crimes during that stretch?
No, sir.
Your first parole?
No,
And then
sir.
how long were you in before you were again paroled?
Approximately 3 months.
3 months and you were paroled out again?
Yes, sir. It was considered a minor violation because the shotgun wasn't mine. It was one of the other people that lived at the house.
There was some. You were asked about the hypodermic, and which I guess was a veterinarian type device rather than a human hypodermic. And you said you didn't really remember much of anything about it. There's something in the record about that Barker says that he saw you, I think the night before, under the hood of a car, and what he described as what looked like you're attempting to take acid out of a battery. Do you remember that?
I remember it from the record, yes, sir.
And you don't remember doing it, though?
No, sir.
Okay.
But well, I know that wouldn't be the case
Why not?
because I'm a mechanic. There's no acid inside of a battery. I'm a licensed mechanic.
Right, I understand.
There's no acid in a battery.
When people refer to the term battery acid, what are we talking about?
The corrosion that happens in oxidation on top of the terminal.
That gunk that shows up?
Yes, sir.
I thought there was an acidic reaction that caused the generation of electricity inside a battery. Am I wrong?
No, electrolysis.
Electrolysis?
Electrolysis, thank you, sir. But there's no acid inside of a battery.
Okay.
It's just water.
And some kind of, something for water to react with.
Well, the plates.
Plates, yeah. But anyway, you don't remember trying to extract any fluid, whether it's acid or
No, sir.
base or something? Okay.
No, sir.
And then Barker testified that there were really two strangulations of Mr. Jones,
Yes, sir.
both with the same devices that had arrived at Jones's house inside your briefcase. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what were they? What were those? That you looped them together into a noose?
They were basically wire ties, heavy-duty wire ties. Something like you'd see flex cuffs that the officers would use, but it was for bundling large bundles of wire.
Were they something you'd use in your business?
Yes, sir.
The auto repair business?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you joined at least two of them together, maybe more.
No, sir.
No, just one was big enough.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so you twisted it to work on his breathing without your having to hold it manually. Is that correct?
Well, it's a self-locking
Self-locking.
device.
Okay.
Once you pull it, it's locked.
Okay.
You have to.
And so you did that on him the first time.
I only remember one time. I understand that there was two times, but I only remember once. Everything seemed so quick. To me, we were in the house for like less than 45 minutes. But by the record and by all the testimony, it was much longer than that. But I don't have that same memory of the time.
Did what was Jones's reaction? From what the limited transcript that I've seen, I didn't get a good feel for what Jones's reaction was when after you took him to the bathroom.
Yes, sir.
And seemed to be gracious to him in that respect.
Yes, sir.
His hands are cuffed behind his back with
Recuffed,
Barker's
yes,
handcuffs.
Yes, sir.
What was his reaction when all of a sudden it changes from apparently I'd rather you knock me out with some kind of hypodermic, which apparently you don't remember,
No, sir.
to this threat to his life? I mean, what was his? Did he say anything? Did he ever ask you why you were doing this to him, since he was a friend?
Yes, sir. He did ask. This was prior to even going into the bathroom. He
Well,
asked me
okay,
why I was
anytime,
doing
yeah.
this.
I want
And I told him I needed to get out of town. I needed the money to get out of town. And I apologized to him that I just had to go. And my recollection, when we left the bathroom and I took him into the bedroom, there was no discussion about anything else. The ties were actually to be used on his wrists so that Randy could recover his handcuffs. But instead of putting them on his wrist, I put them over his head from behind and pulled it tight.
So it may well be that by the time he realized what was happening, he couldn't talk.
Correct.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes. Ms. Stenson.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Towery, when you were just answering Mr. Lasota's question, when you were telling Mr. Jones that you had to get out of town, did you ask him for money at that point? Or did he offer?
He did not offer, but I asked him where the money was. I asked him where his safe was. But in the context of the robbery, it wasn't like asking him for a loan. I was asking in the context of taking it from him.
And that memory seems very clear,
Yes, ma'am.
but yet, I don't know how long. You say, according to the trial and everything, that it was longer than you think it was. But how is it that you became unclear in your memory from the time you taking him to the bathroom to the time that you inject him with the substance?
I don't ever remember injecting him. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. The type of needle used, everything about it doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, that doesn't matter. I'm responsible for what happened.
Do you have a theory of something else happening? How someone else injecting him using that syringe? Do you have a theory yourself?
I can only say that while I was searching the house for what they had told me was almost 2 hours, Randy was holding the gun on Mark. I was not in that room. I don't know, but I know I don't remember doing anything to him with a needle. I would not try to inject somebody way up here on the bicep with a needle. It doesn't make sense to me. It wouldn't be what I would do.
It's almost as if you're implying that Randy had the syringe. Is that so, or is that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Mrs. Wilkins.
Well, my follow-up to what Ms. Stinson's line of questioning is, I do realize that you were in another part of the house looking for the money, a safe, and whatever items you wanted to take, and that Randy was in the bedroom with the gun on Mr. Jones.
No, ma'am.
No. He was in the other part of the house.
Yes, ma'am.
The living room at that point. Now, when you took him back to the bedroom, you were with him, though, constantly.
Yes, ma'am.
You would have noticed if he had had any...
I didn't even look.
Between the living room and the bedroom, you didn't notice if there had been... Because supposedly you tried to inject him in his feet, so his socks would have been off.
I don't even know anything.
As well as both arms, is reported, I believe, in testimony provided by Randy.
I don't even remember that in the
And he had his socks on when he went to the bedroom.
Yes, ma'am.
Because then Randy actually removed his... It's kind of unclear. I think
Well,
he was going to remove them, but Randy, I think, ended up removing Mr. Jones's socks.
I think Mr. Jones took off his shoes, but I could be wrong. I mean, Randy might have done it. I'm not sure.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't think, excuse me, ma'am. I don't think Randy, in the bedroom, I don't think Randy ever went near Mark. I don't remember him ever going near him. He was at the foot of the bed pretty much the whole time.
The whole time?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you really never left the bedroom either, though.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Kirschbaum, do you have a question?
Yes. Mr. Towery,
Yes, ma'am.
in the information we had, it states that the syringe was thrown away into some bushes. Who threw the syringe away?
I only know what they said in the record. Randy said that he threw the syringe into the bushes. I don't know.
So you don't remember any part of that at all?
No, ma'am.
Nothing to do with the syringe?
No, ma'am. I had seen it. I know Randy had one. But I mean, it was completely useless to me.
So you do recall there was a syringe?
Randy had the syringe
Randy
at the
had
house, his house. He owned it. It was his.
Oh, I see. Okay. And hearing Mr. Jones was basically a kind individual to you. He
Yes,
was
ma'am.
like a friend trying to help you. Why did you kill him? Why not just rob him?
I don't know. I don't know why I did it.
And you have no idea.
I only thought I had to get away. I had to get away. And I wish I wouldn't have done it.
And I have one last question
Yes.
for you. You know, your story is very similar to a lot of individuals we see in your situation. They've come from horrendous backgrounds. They're drug addicts and commit a crime that they terribly regret years later. They've done well in prison. Seem like a very nice person. But the issue is the crime. Why should we look at you any different than any of the other folks in the same situation?
All I know is that I've done my best to change my life. 20 years I've spent getting it together and trying to be a good dad and good uncle. That's all I can do. It's the only thing I can do. And try to speak about the life-destroying aspects of drugs. As I don't know why I would be considered any different than anybody else. I'm nothing special.
All right,
I have another question.
Yeah, Mr. Rousseau.
Mr. Towery, do you remember discussing with Mr. Jones when the next people would be coming to the house, like cleaning people or friends or family?
Yes.
And he basically said that he didn't expect people for several days. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why did you ask him that?
I want to say that I didn't want Mark to be tied up for a long time, but I don't know. I can't sit here and say that I was trying to be merciful about it or anything else. I was carrying on conversations with Mark that were inconsequential, that really had no meaning, just for the purpose of getting through the event, the night.
Like we call making small talk.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I have
Thank
a
you.
moment, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman?
Mr. Bates, if I can, if you want to, you know, have a little bit of time with your client to talk with him, we can arrange that. Maybe we'll take a short break, and then you can.
I think there might have been some confusion about the timeline on the armed robbery that happened first.
Okay.
The armed robbery happened, and then within a couple of weeks later, the murder happened. I wasn't arrested between the two.
Oh, so you had not been apprehended for the armed robbery?
No, sir.
Okay.
So you were still on parole?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
There was no attempt to revoke your second parole at the time of the murder?
No, sir. It was, the two happened, and then I was arrested.
Do you feel that you might need some time to?
I think we're okay. We could
Okay.
discuss matters with Mr. Towery during a break.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
But do ask for a break if you
Sure.
think you.
Sure.
And Mr. Towery, I think it might be appropriate at this time to introduce your visitors. You were making some statements and apologies to members of your family. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. That's fine. Just disregard that.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, sir.
Members of the board. My name is Pablo Stewart, and I will be proceeding with a few questions from the attorney.
Dr. Stewart, I'd like to introduce your experience and background to the board so they have a better understanding of your history. Can you tell them a bit about your education and your work history?
First of all, I'm a psychiatrist.
If you could speak up.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Right. There we go.
Never been accused of being soft-spoken before, so that's a little different. Okay. I'm a psychiatrist. My educational background starts as an undergraduate. I attended the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis and graduating with a degree in chemistry. And after that time, I served 5 years in the United States Marine Corps as an infantry officer. Upon completion of my military service, I was accepted by the University of California in San Francisco School of Medicine, where I completed my degree, my medical doctorate degree in 1982. After that time, I stayed on at the University of California to complete my internal medicine internship and my psychiatric residency program, which I completed in 1986. Since that time, I have worked at the University of California, San Francisco, at different settings. I worked at the county hospital where I ran the inpatient forensic unit, and that we took care of the patients from the county hospital, from the county jail who needed inpatient psychiatric care. I also then took a transfer within the university and ran a drug and alcohol unit at the San Francisco Veterans Administration Hospital. And that hospital was, my unit was particularly tasked with dealing with what we call dual diagnosis patients. People very similar to, as I explained about Mr. Towery, who have a concurrent substance abuse problem that's coexistent with the mental health difficulties. During the course of my career, I've worked as a forensic consultant, and I currently continue to work as a forensic consultant. I've worked for federal courts in California, supervising the variety of consent decrees and court orders that mandate certain levels of psychiatric and medical care within the California Department of Corrections. I've worked for the Department of Health and Human Services. I've also done work for the U.S. Department of Justice as a juvenile medical and psychiatric consultant. And again, in that capacity, I've gone through different places in the country and monitored the agreements that different states have gotten into with the federal government for the provision of psychiatric care. That's sort of a highlight. I don't wish to go over my whole CV here, but those are the things that I do. And I currently still work as a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California School of Medicine, and I also work as a forensic consultant.
Thank you.
Dr. Stewart, the board has your report, which is Exhibit 15 to our clemency petition. In your report, you've reached some conclusions, psychiatric conclusions about Robert. Can you describe to the board what you did to reach those conclusions?
In arriving at my opinions that you have seen here, that you can see in my report, I examined Mr. Towery on 3 different occasions. I saw him 3 times here at the Browning unit. Twice was through the plexiglass, and one time we had a 3-hour contact visit. I spent a total of 8 hours with him. In addition, I reviewed the materials that you could see I listed in my declaration as far as having to do with his trial, having to do with social history documents. And in addition, I also interviewed both of his sisters on the telephone.
After doing all of that, what conclusions did you reach about Robert?
The psychiatric conclusions that I reached after completing my evaluation were that at the time of the crime for which he was sentenced to death, he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and substance abuse disorder.
I'd like to walk the board through your findings, and I'd like to start with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I think a lot of us have some familiarity with PTSD, at least through television, where we see the stories about soldiers who return from battle and have flashbacks and are easily startled. Can you describe PTSD for the board in a little more detail?
There is sort of a Hollywood notion about PTSD. You know, a veteran's walking down the street and a motorcycle backfires and the person dives in, tries to dig a foxhole in the ground, and these sorts of things. And that certainly can occur. That's one example of PTSD, but that's sort of an extreme example. The majority of people who suffer from PTSD have been exposed to trauma during their childhood and adolescence, very similar to Mr. Towery. What the condition itself is a neuropsychiatric disorder. It's the only psychiatric condition that's defined by an external event or events. All the other psychiatric disorders are considered inherent biological conditions that happen, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, something like that. PTSD is very different in that it's defined by an external event. That's the first thing you have to establish the diagnosis, is traumatic experience. And then, as it's been studied very well since the Vietnam War, that exposure to traumatic experiences then causes physiologic changes in a person's brain. It affects the way they perceive reality. It affects the way that they can plan and think about things. It affects their cognitions. So I call it a really severe neurocognitive disorder. And I would like the board to really appreciate the fact that a person suffering from PTSD doesn't think the same way as a person who doesn't suffer from PTSD. Their thinking is very, very impaired. That's the main thing I would hope that I could convey to you today.
You've also found that Robert suffered from major depressive disorder, I think since he was from a child. Can you explain to the board the differences between how depression manifests in a child versus an adult?
Well, if I can...
Oh, did I jump in too
no,
soon?
No, I want to get to that question, but I guess what I wanted to end this whole discussion on PTSD was that PTSD doesn't exist by itself. It is one of these conditions that is commonly associated with what they call comorbid psychiatric conditions. And there's I call it an unholy triad of conditions that exist in someone who have PTSD. You have post-traumatic stress disorder. 88% of the people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder also suffer from major depressive disorder, which was my findings here with Mr. Towery. And that same group of people who are now suffering from PTSD and major depressive disorder also have a substance use disorder. And I'll explain a little further about how that's all interrelated. Now, the question that I was presented about how does depression present as a child and adolescent as opposed to an adult, you really look for these psychiatric disorders to have objective presentations. And so in a child, you see that in acting out behavior in school. You see that in poor academic performance. You see someone not be able to keep up to grade level, which all is the case here with Mr. Towery. That's how you see that as a child, as opposed to an adult who is able to express to you, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling suicidal, I don't feel like getting out of bed, these sorts of things. Children and adolescents don't necessarily come forward with those symptoms.
We've heard, the board's heard Ms. Day talk about Robert's extensive meth use around the time of this offense. Can you explain to the board what that means from a clinical perspective?
From a clinical perspective, the amount of methamphetamine that has been documented that Mr. Towery was using at the time of this offense is a tremendous amount. And you see the numbers, there were 3.5 grams to 7 grams a day, and you wonder why those idiosyncratic numbers are what he reports using. And that is, the 3.5 grams is 1/8 of an ounce, 7 grams is 1/4 of an ounce, and methamphetamine is also often sold in ounces or eighths of ounces or quarters of ounces. But this amount of drug use is tremendous. Methamphetamine is a psychostimulant that has these significant psychiatric sequelae associated with it, namely aggression, impulsivity, further impairing your cognitive functioning. At the level that Mr. Towery was using, it very likely causes delusional thinking, paranoia, as he's talked about this morning, and paranoia, is misperceiving your reality, thinking and really experiencing a threat when there's no threat there. I always remind people that if people are really out to get you, you're not paranoid. But if you're thinking that people are out to get you, when in fact there really aren't, or every little benign situation you find yourself in, you're feeling under threat, that's paranoia. That's associated with a degree of methamphetamine use that he was doing at the time of the crime.
Can you talk a little bit about how Robert's substance abuse played into or interacted with his PTSD and his major depressive disorder?
Well, Robert's substance abuse, as he talked about this morning, and that, and paranoia, is significant. That you had a very good presentation about the extent of his use and what Dr. Bayless had reported at the original trial. And the thing about Dr. Bayless is that he got it partially correct. He was unable to link it, and I believe because he didn't have the extensive interviews and ability to speak to people about Mr. Towery's background. But he wasn't able to link it to any what we call a pre-existing psychiatric disorder, because Mr. Towery's drug use doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are some people that use drugs and that's all they do. That's their problem. They use drugs. In Mr. Towery's case, he had, to my opinion, which I hold to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. Those two conditions are the ones that are most likely to be what we call self-medicated. And self-medication carries a lot of meanings in the community. How I think of it, and the psychiatric community thinks of self-medication, is that a person has a psychiatric disorder, usually undiagnosed, as was the case with Mr. Towery. They find relief through the use of substances. He began drinking at 6 years old. I mean, that alone should have bells going off in psychiatrists and psychologists' minds when they were interviewing somebody like this, that there's something else going on. It is not usual for 6-year-olds to start drinking, even in the context in which Mr. Towery's drinking occurred. And then you go to the next time when he started smoking marijuana at the age of 11 and 12. Yeah, certainly some kids smoke marijuana at 11 and 12. I'm very aware of that. But also it was happening at times when his parents were divorced. And now he's living there with his mom, and whatever protection that he had from the person he knew as his father was no longer there from the abuse of his mom. And it makes perfect sense to me from a psychiatric standpoint that his marijuana use would pick up right then because of the fact that he's now experiencing this trauma. And then finally, when he starts using cocaine and methamphetamine during high school, as well as the other substances that you saw listed, he gives a very interesting response clinically. When I asked him, he says, well, what were the drugs doing for you? You know, a typical response would be, oh, I got high, you know, I was able to have sex, I was able to do this, I was up all night, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that doesn't really talk to us about self-medication. But Mr. Towery's response was that it made me feel. I started to experience emotions that I think other people experience, which isn't, you know, I have to do further evaluation, but that is an answer that really implies that he's self-medicated. So he has this overwhelming self-medicative component to his substance use. So I would have you consider that he's not just a drug addict, but he's a person with severe pre-existing psychiatric disorder that because he wasn't offered formal treatment, he wasn't taken to a child psychiatrist or anything, and given treatment for his conditions, people find out how to take care of themselves. And that's what he did. And that's how I would have you think about his substance use.
At trial, the judge made the statement that Robert had voluntarily chose to live his life on meth, and I think that goes to what you're talking about right now. From a clinical perspective, do you think that the judge has accurately described Robert's substance abuse?
You know, again, I think the judge got it partially correct in that I'm not here to tell you that he had no participation in his drug use. Okay, there is a volitional component to drug use. There's no question about that. But what I think that statement implies to me is that the particular judge in the case wasn't presented information about the severity of his mental illness to put the drug use in a different context.
I think for the board's information, or maybe the ultimate question is, you know, what does this all mean? How did this impact Robert on the day that Mark Jones was killed?
Yes. putting together this, hopefully this is consistent with what I've been telling you so far during this presentation. And I would like to start at the end of the story where the person has cognitive dysfunction. And that's the fancy psychiatric term for you're not thinking clearly. You know, I certainly was listening when the board was asking Mr. Towery, said, well, what was the deal? Why didn't you just shoot him? What was the deal with the syringe? Weren't you there getting battery acid? You know, why didn't you ask him where the money was? And the responses were, I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. And that is absolutely consistent with a person who has cognitive dysfunction. They don't know what they're thinking. They're unable to appreciate what's going on around them in a way that all of us here today could appreciate the circumstances. Because we're thinking about this in a non-cognitively impaired way. So that's the end of the story. But we can go back, we can see where it all began. Trauma, which then resulted in post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. He then finds a way to address some of his symptoms through self-medication with illicit substances. And then that further contributes to his cognitive dysfunction. So now we have three things that are impairing his ability to think clearly at the time of the crime.
All of the information that you've provided to the board through your report and here speaking with the board today, was this available back in 1991 at the time of Robert's trial?
Yes. You know, as a psychiatrist, being asked to review cases like this, you know, I have strong reactions to the fact that the information that I'm talking with you about this morning is not stuff that was discovered last year or even, you know, during the 2000s. This stuff has been around. This is not new material. You know, at the Veterans Administration hospital where I was working, you know, in the 80s, this was appreciated. People with PTSD self-medicate. And so this information was available to people at the time of his trial. But yet, no one was able to put the different pieces together. And I don't know why, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying the net result was that no one was able to put this all together for anybody in a way that I'm hopefully expressing it to you today.
The board asked Robert why they should look at him any differently from the other people that come in front of this board and have committed crimes and appear to be changed people. You know, do you have, from your clinical perspective, do you have any information that you can offer the board to help them grapple with that question?
Yes, I do. And I think that's an excellent question. Why should we think about you differently than someone else who comes here, been in prison for 20 years and appears to be reformed, expresses remorse, et cetera, et cetera? Well, in Robert's case, he has all of these things that were happening to him through no fault of his own. He didn't choose to have a genetic predisposition for substance abuse because mom was an alcoholic. He didn't choose that. He didn't choose it wasn't his wishes to be sexually abused or to be beaten by his mom over an extended period of time or having your mother arrest you when you go back in your house to take a shower. That was not anything that he was wanting to do. And it resulted in a situation that put him at extreme risk for continued substance use. And in the absence of formal psychiatric care, I think we see what the results was. I think I would have you think about it that way, that it is different. This is not the same as other cases where the person doesn't have that particular background and psychiatric disorders and clear pattern of self-medication of substances.
Is there anything else that I haven't covered that you want to share with the board about Robert?
I can go on this for a while, and I know I don't want to. But if there's anything that I would need further clarification, it'd be my pleasure to try to answer questions. Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Kirschbaum.
Doctor, how do you diagnose PTSD?
you diagnose PTSD by a combination of things. You certainly listen to the person telling you their story, but oftentimes, because of the illness, because of one of the major features of the illness is avoidance of discussions about the trauma, that we try to establish the trauma by third-party sources, which was done in this case. But also during the course of the interviews, I'm observing, in this case, Mr. Towery, to see if he's presenting any behaviors that are consistent with PTSD, and he did. I won't bore you with going over my report here, but you'll see that I listed all the diagnostic criteria, and one of them is psychological distress and physiological reactivity when you're sort of forced to deal with some of the traumatic experiences. And that clearly was happening during the course of our interviews. Also the hyperarousal, the exaggerated startle response, these are things he demonstrated to me. But also, the last thing, because I don't want to just keep going on about this, is you listen to the story, and if you listen to Robert's story, you hear the story of PTSD in there. And then now I go back in to try to confirm it by looking for symptoms, getting third-party collaboration, etc. That's how you do it.
And so you're saying by the fact that he was using drugs, that he was self-medicating to have feelings that others didn't have. And I guess my question to you is, so we have someone with PTSD who had depression and all, so how does he medicate himself now? Is he on medication, psychotropic drugs at this time, or is he just functioning just fine?
Well, I don't, that's a very good question. I don't think he's functioning just fine, first of all, and he has been on antidepressant medication with the Arizona Department of Corrections. But I just want to clarify something that you were saying. I don't mean to say just because he was using drugs, he was self-medicating. But in listening to his particular story about his history of drug use, it's very suggestive of self-medication. 5-year-old, 6, 7-year-old drinking alcohol, 11-year-old marijuana. Then you sort of compare that to events that were happening in his life at the time. That looks like self-medication, further confirmation. And he has been treated. And also, he's away from drugs now. He's in a situation where he's no longer continuing to be abused by his mother. So things are not well for him, but it's sad to say that this has been a stable period for him. I think as evidenced by his behavior.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, yeah. We're going to take about maybe a 10, 15-minute break to